interesting weekend. They had the bioluminescence out over here in the South Bay area, and so people were crowding the beaches at night, like looking at the different lights and everything. So what I want to do is I wanted to, as we open up, I wanted to start off with any questions that you have to go ahead and post it. Like for those of you who have been on, who were on last week, and kind of work through some of the things that we talked about, some of the tasks that we discussed, and to see if you have any questions at all, or if in thinking about how you would like to have a fresh start this week in your business, in your life, and all things considered when it comes to what it is that you're doing or doing these times, feel free to go ahead and post the questions in like whenever you feel like it. Okay. The reason being is I'm used to actually doing more interactive type of presentations where I tend to cater and custom the content that I've thought about sharing to what is actually more important, more relevant to those of you who are on. And so if you have any questions at all, any concerns, let me start off with the topic that I want to go through today. And the topic this week is about fear and frequency. And the reason why I throw frequency in there is because I want to give us an opportunity to talk a little bit about physical frequency and how that is relevant to a lot of the work that I do and a lot of the things that explain the unexplainable when it comes to that. Because we learn about frequency growing up in physics, in school, you know, for those of us who took physics in high school. I actually talked about this not too long ago, and I was told that somebody actually raised their hand and said, "Wait, I never took physics in high school." I was like, "Really? I thought that was a required thing," but apparently it's not always required depending on school you go to. But I still remember Mrs. Minetti was my physics teacher, and I enjoyed physics so much that I became her TA because she was such a cool teacher. And it was interesting. Not too long ago, I was going through my my stuff in my bedroom over at my parents' house, and I was going through some old papers, and I found an old test that I was responsible for grading, and I guess apparently it fell out of my folder. She allowed me to take tests home to help her grade, and it fell out of my folder, and the poor kid didn't get the A- on on the recorded. Or maybe she just kind of, I think that she just gave them the A or something like that. But anyway, so fear and frequency is going to be the topic today. Highly encourage you, like just thinking about the fears that you may have, the fears that the role fear has played in your life, even before this whole challenge that we're doing right now, this global challenge we're doing right now. And if you have any questions about fear itself and how it's stopped you or helped you or any of that, feel free to post it in while I talk about this topic today. So fear and frequency. This is a topic I talk a lot about with my students and clients because it can be such a debilitating state of being. Okay. You know, I think what's important about as I'm doing these presentations every single week, that we come together and work together and mastermind together in a way that helps you week after week start to move in a direction that has you emerging from these circumstances in a much better position. What I talked about last week is that one of our goals is to learn how to pivot and adapt and stay resilient so that, you know, with every challenge that comes in our life, it's like going to the gym and working out. You, as time goes on, life goes on, you work out, you work through these challenges, and then you get stronger and you grow and become more adept and more powerful in everything that it is that you're doing. For those of us who go to the gym, you will find that that's what happens. You know, if you go to the gym consistently and you consistently increase the weights that you bear during the anaerobic exercise to strengthen your muscles, tear down, you know, because when you build muscle, you're literally tearing down the fibers of the muscle. And then when it heals stronger, it heals bigger. Okay. And so a lot of what's going on right now in our world is an ability for us to strengthen a different kind of muscle, not necessarily physical muscle, although there are those who are working out a lot doing at home during these times, and then you can do that. But what we're looking at is building the muscle that are required for all areas of life. you know, not just in our work, but in our health, in our relationships. And there are the metaphorical muscles that can be worked out. One of them is understanding the fear and frequency component that exists in every single human being's psyche, every single human being's lives. You know, I was presented a quote to kind of have us think about things, to kind of set the tone, and it's very relevant. The quote was originally from George Adair. And what was interesting about this one, because when I hear about quotes, and I like quotes, especially when I'm going to be talking about quotes, I go and look at who was the original sayer, I guess, quoter, I guess, and to see what he was all about. And what's interesting is, let me start with the quote. The quote itself is says, everything we want is on the other side of fear. And what was interesting was that when this quote was shared to me, it was shared to me from someone who actually shared it to somebody else who also happens to be in real estate. And which is interesting is about that is that the person who originally stated that quote, it was back in the 1800s. His name was George Adair. George Adair made that quote, I think, post-Civil War. And what's interesting about this guy is that he's a real estate guy. He was a real estate developer before the Civil War. And I want you to pay attention to a little bit of his journey, because I found this fascinating that we happen to be choosing this particular quote. Before the Civil War, he was in real estate. When the Civil War happened, which was like, you know, all over the United States, right? Civil War, he actually moved away from real estate and went into the newspaper business and the cotton field projection, or kind of like a projector, or what was it, speculator type of business. Okay, so he went to agriculture and newspaper. He adapted, he adjusted, he utilized his talents from other areas. Then when the war was over, he transitioned back to an even bigger real estate type of position. He became a developer with his sons and created a real estate development company. Okay, really fascinating. But the quote that people have been using from George Adair is basically, everything we want, and I want you to think about this, everything we want is on the other side of fear. Now, as you're allowing that quote to sit in, just kind of percolate in your mind, whether it be conscious or unconscious or both. I'm going to talk a little bit about frequency, okay, and why that's such an important thing to understand what every human being exhibits or emits. Okay, what is frequency? Okay, if we remember for those of us who did take physics, okay, and those who don't, we still know what frequency is. Every type of energy has a frequency output. Okay, if we look at the lights around us, okay, when we talk about wattage and megahertz and the light frequency, there is a light frequency, so it changes. If you notice behind me, there are different colors of light. Different colors of light are representative of different frequency outputs from that light bulb. One is LED, one is not LED, one is fluorescent, one, you know, and so on and so forth. Now, sound has a frequency, okay? Every time you play a note on a piano or a keyboard, every type of note is a different type of frequency, okay? What they do is, back during the SARS days, when they're measuring the heat emissions from human beings to see if they're on a fever or not, every level of heat has a different frequency output. Okay, so everything around us, you know, the sound that you're hearing from me is depending on my tonality, depending on how fast or how slow, how loud, it impacts the frequency output. Every time there is a nuclear reaction, okay, in every living thing, there is a little bit of or a lot of a frequency output. Every time you have a thought, when they put those to measure, like to sleep analysis, right? So what they do is they measure the cranial output from your brain while you're sleeping, so they can measure when you're in REM state or everything. How do they measure that? There is a frequency output. Okay, so now that I've kind of gone over that, everything on this planet, living or technology or whatever, listening to the ocean, sun rays, and it's a frequency. Okay, when they're talking about all these UV rays that will shift the RNA and kill the viruses, there's a particular frequency that it needs to be at in order for that to happen. Now, I'm reminded of a time when I used to be, fast and furious and have a really loud car, and I would have 1,000 watts pumping out of my car back in the day because I love music and that was just way too loud. Didn't know why I needed 1,000-watt system in my car. But what I noticed was something interesting was that when I parked in front of a business, and even with my windows slightly cracked open, the bass sound that came out would actually vibrate and create oscillation on the windows. Okay, when we see that, and it's like almost like this wave sensation, okay, in physics we call that resonance. Okay, now when we hear about people who hit certain notes, or we hear sounds that are so loud, like the cracking of those Harley Davidsons that rip across, and that sometimes they shatter windows because it's so loud, that's what we call dissonance. So in the world of frequency and physics, there's called resonance and dissonance. Okay, this is all going to be relevant. I'm going to be all together. So resonance and dissonance. In other words, resonance is an attraction. Okay, there is a harmonious relationship between the frequency output and the receiving end of that frequency. And so it basically becomes more like a massage type of sensation. For those of you who like deep bass type of music, it feels good because there's a resonance with you. For those that don't, it's what we call a dissonance. Okay, so what do we do when we hear music that we don't like? We move away from it. So a dissonant frequency is a repulsion frequency. So we have attraction and repulsion. Okay, depending on what is harmoniously there. Now, what does this have to do with fear? Okay. Here's the thing, we see in Hollywood all the time, the guy who is the most fearful actually ends up dying first, right? We go into the ocean and we go into the wild, and basically predators will be more drawn to prey that is in a fearful state than prey that is confident. Why is that? Okay. Though we see it in the actions and behavior of things, what we're seeing right there in that moment is frequency resonance and dissonance. When you are in a state of fear, you need to put an image in your mind that pretends that what you fear is real. And in that moment, when you are in that state of fear, your mind then commands all the physiological responses in your body, all the motion in your body. And remember, whenever your body is doing something, creating a nuclear reaction on a cellular level, it produces a frequency. And when we stay in a state of fear for too long, we start to emit and resonate that frequency. And remember what happens when there's a resonant frequency, it creates a harmony with compatible frequencies. In other words, what you fear, you will attract if you maintain that fear long enough. What you entertain in your mind that puts you in a particular state and you start to embody that state, you will start to attract what it is that you think about. That's why they say it's so important to work on your mindset, because then your mind then affects your emotional expression, which then impacts your energy output, which then is then propagated out from a frequency standpoint from your physical body. And so that's why it's so important. And one of the first things I address with all my students and clients is, what is it that you're afraid of? And what is it that you've been afraid of? We hear about it all the time when people are talking about their relationships and are going from one relationship to another. We see it there. Those are many fears, right? I don't want this in a person. I don't want this in a person. And it's fascinating when I ask people, it's like, what do you want? And they start off with a whole list of everything that they don't want. And they almost never get to stating what they actually do want. What happens is that the unconscious mind has a hard time actually dealing with negatives. Okay, I use this example all the time when I say, don't think about chocolate cake. What's the first thing you think about? You have to first think about chocolate cake, and then you have to figure out a way to not think about it, right? Whereas if I said, don't think about chocolate cake, instead think about a celery, or think about a salad, think about a chicken salad, Chinese chicken salad from, what's that place that does it? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, but do you see what I'm saying? The minute I give you a different option, the unconscious mind takes the quickest road and starts thinking about something else. However, if you just say, don't do this, this is what I don't want, the unconscious mind drops the don't and keeps the internal representation of what you don't want And eventually, if you hold it there long enough, it will think that's actually what you want. And this is why we see people go from one bad situation to another, because they keep talking about, I don't want this, and I don't want this, and I don't want this. And then that's what happens. So in these times, okay, one of the things we want to pay attention to, okay, and not put down, because unfortunately we grew up in a society is a little bit fear driven, okay, and what's odd is I've noticed a lot of people don't like to talk about what they're afraid of. Like it's not something they want to, because they deal with it all the time. It's like that underlying like persistent fever, that low grade fear that just never goes away. And so what I want to do this week is encourage you to actually start to pay attention to what specifically are you afraid of, and what can we do to address it and understand it, why it's there to begin with. Going back to the quote, everything we want is on the other side of fear. The reason why that quote works so well is because most of the time, fear is presented as a way to protect ourselves from moving forward to a certain place. Now, granted, if you're going into a sketchy area, or going to a circumstance where, you don't belong, yes, it's a good idea to have that. So reasonable amount of fear is actually okay. Persistent fear that we carry throughout our lives is actually going to be what derails us and debilitates and keeps us from moving forward, keeps us from seeing the answers, okay? I encourage people to minimize how much we look at the news during these times, because that does start to imprint into our unconscious mind. In no matter how much you consciously say, okay, I'm not going to deal with this, I'm not going to deal with this. Social media is another one. And what's so cool about social media, though, is that when you start to curate and pay less attention to what you don't want to look at, Facebook is kind of interesting. It adapts to you, right? So one of the things that you want to do is start to think about that, embrace that. And for those of you who are on today, if you like a little bit of support around that, in the Q&A, put some of your significant fears out, and let's understand what we can do to get a handle on that, manage that, embrace that, so that we can actually change that into something that will inspire us to move forward in a more powerful way. Because like that quote says, once you get to the other side of that, you will find most of the time we put those fears there in a way to keep us from going to that next level. Because when you go to that next level, a lot of amazing things can happen. And at the same time, a lot of unknown things can happen, right? So the first question that comes in, okay, it says fear of financial insecurity. Okay, so my question is this, is that if there's a statement of fear of financial insecurity, let's define what that actually is, because everybody has a unique definition. And this is what I love to do, is that oftentimes when we have a fear, we fear the way we articulate and state our fear is in a nebulous type of statement, and a statement that is not necessarily objective, but is primarily driven by a subjective way. And what makes it challenging is if we keep it there without defining the terms, it will make it difficult, because we try to use other methods of solving the problem, things that other people do. So for example, let's take fear of financial insecurity. For those that have fear of financial insecurity, I want you to pay attention to this particular approach. Okay, so you fear financial insecurity. Let's define what financial insecurity actually is. Okay, and this is where most people get a little bit like, I don't even want to go there. Why? Because you're afraid that facing that means you're gonna have to do something about it, okay? And you may have to do something that you don't want to do. So let's look at that. Define what financial insecurity actually is, okay? Financial insecurity, let's define financial first, okay? What do you mean by financial? Is it financial at home, financial flow? Is it money flow? Is it income? Is it long-term investments? What is it? What is the financial that you're referring to? Insecurity, what does insecurity actually mean to you? Okay, insecurity is the opposite of security, both of which, unfortunately, are negatively driven statements. I want security as a goal. Oftentimes, most of my clients at the beginning say, I want security. And after a while we work on it, we realize that's not the appropriate word. Security implies that the absence of something, or to move away from something, to keep yourself safe from something, okay? So what you want to do is define what financial insecurity actually is. Another one that just came up. Oh, what's that, Lauren? My biggest fear is not being able to get my work done due to homeschooling and falling behind. Okay. And so what's cool about this one is that, okay, if you have a fear of not being able to get my work done due to homeschooling and falling behind, you want to break that apart, because there's different layers to those fears. Okay. This is not just one fear. The reason why it's a big fear is because it actually gets lumped together. Okay. Where did that, oh, dismissed. Okay. Oh, where did that question go? Okay. So it says here, my biggest fear is not being able to get my work done. Let's address that first, okay? One of the fears is that you're not going to be able to get your work done. How is that a problem? Okay, what makes that an actual fear if you don't get your work done? That's one segment. Put that on a piece of paper, write it there, write a list on that one. Okay, boom, put that aside, okay? Homeschooling and falling behind. Let's say that's, okay, if you don't have a fear around homeschooling, let's assume if you do, then let's do that as a separate thing, fear of homeschooling, okay? But let's say homeschooling and falling behind. Okay, great. So let's put that fear in a different column. Let's not intermingle these fears so that they create a bigger fear. Do you see what happened? Our unconscious mind likes to lump things together so that we can run a particular pattern, so we can run a deeper belief of what may happen. The deeper fear is not the getting the work done, or getting the homeschooling falling behind, or not getting the homeschooling falling behind. It's what happens as a result of that. As a result of that, that's what the actual fear is. But we hide that fear. We protect that actual fear by using not getting my work done or homeschooling and falling behind. Okay, so the next thing that you want to do, Lauren, is put on the side. It says, what is my biggest fear when it comes to homeschooling and falling behind? What could happen then? And you follow that. We call it following a rabbit hole. You go down the rabbit hole deep enough, you will find the root cause. And the reason why we want to get to the root fear of it all is that when we resolve that root fear, all these other what we call presenting problems, all these other problems that led up to that get resolved. When it's like when we deal with a sick shrub, right? We don't trim the hedges, we go to the root. And when it comes to fear, to resolve the fear so that you can actually have a clarity of thought, and you can have solutions come in to resolve it, means you have to go to the root of it. Okay. So most of the time when we articulate our initial fears, it's just the surface. But what that's doing is gives you the presenting problems are instead of the root problem. And to do that, you need to define the terms first and foremost, like financial insecurity, and then make a list of, well, what's their biggest fear? That work doesn't get done. Well, if work doesn't get done, then I can't make money. Okay, great. Why is it a problem? How is it a problem that I can't make money? So I can't pay my bills. Okay, what happens if I can't pay my bills? If I can't pay my bills, then I can't stay in my place, which is not true right now because they have some some interesting programs going on. But anyway, let's say that's a problem. And then I'll get behind. And then there's going to be this mountain of debt that's coming up. Okay, how is the problem? They have a mountain of debt. Well, then I'm going to be, and you just keep going down that path. And it's interesting because I had a client that we were doing that, something similar. I said, so how is it a problem that you don't make enough money in your business? Okay, and we went down this path. I can't pay my bills. And it went down further. And then basically there was a belief that his family would leave him, and then he would be destitute, alone in a van by the water. It was interesting because that was literally what popped up in his mind. And when you do this work, you pay attention to how your mind is presenting the imagery, the internal representation, so that you can describe it. As long as you're open to whatever shows up, you're going to find some really interesting things. But that is the way to get to the root cause of things. And so when he got there, it started to release because he, for the first time in a long time, really kind of confronted the root cause of his fear and said, am I really going to be in an old beat up van, destitute by the water, alone? I was like, are you? He's like, logically, it doesn't make any sense. I said, yeah, but our problems in our life don't exist for logical reasons. If so, we would have solved it already. Okay. And this is something I want to say is that, recognize that our challenges and our struggles in life that keep us from moving forward or getting answers or getting clarity are due to the fact that we have an illogical reason for keeping it around. And that's what keeps it around, because we live in such a logical, linear society that we have to solve things in a linear fashion. But every single one of my students and clients who have had deep root causes released, it didn't make sense. And later on, they talk about it, they're laughing about it. That makes zero sense to me, why that even exists. But that's precisely why it still exists, because our mind can't make sense of it, right? Yeah, I figured it was Kim because I don't think Lauren's homeschooling. Okay, so those are great questions, okay? So what I want to start to encourage you guys to do right now is think about that frequency discussion we just had. Any questions that you have about it, that's a very important component to understand, because then you can start thinking about into your life and take mastery over the decisions that you've made. Take mastery over the fears that you perpetuate in your mind and what you ended up attracting due to the resonance and dissonance, okay? When you are emitting a higher level of frequency, okay? For example, they measure different kinds of frequency outputs through different emotions, okay? Fear is pretty down low, okay? When you go into a state of empowerment or optimism or love or even the desire to get things done, the frequency is much higher. And what happens is that the resonant frequency attracts opportunities for you to do so, attracts people that are on the same frequency to be able to move in that direction. Okay? So really, really important. One of the things that Nikki and I had discussing, and it came up, and I want to actually pull up the question here that that Nikki posed to me earlier. Where is it? Excuse me while I look and find it. While I'm doing that, post more questions, please. Okay, so I want to break down this particular, I'm gonna copy this, hold on, and put it on here. Okay, let's see. Any questions so far about fear and frequency? Any questions? Okay. Okay, so here was a statement. Here was something that got sent over to me from Nikki earlier this past week as a result of our talk last Monday, which was real estate is a people and contact business, essential or not. I feel that it is impossible to conduct business, okay, normally right now. Going through people's houses just seems wrong during a time of distancing and would-be reflection. So my fundamental struggle is that our practices are halted and that clients seem to be too internally focused, as we should all perhaps be, to be receptive to marketing efforts. I love this because there's so many different layers. A lot of what's going on right here is driven by root cause limiting belief systems that if we were to address and resolve within ourselves, it can open up a world of opportunities, okay? So let's break it down piece by piece. And when I do this, I want you, if anything this resonates, please take note of it, because this is what we do to help people deconstruct what emanates or what is uttered out of their mouth as clues and opportunities for growth, clues and opportunities for us to kind of not have this be a problem anymore. So real estate is a people and contact business. Yes, essential or not. I feel that it is impossible. So the word impossible is what we call a universal quantifier. When someone actually uses the word impossible, you can tell from the work that we do as coaches and consultants and everything, that the clues that we get from words are invaluable. So the word impossible, okay, tells me right off the bat there's already a block that we've created, and from a belief standpoint, that there is an impossibility. When universal quantifiers like nothing and everything and impossible come up in language, I know that the mind is deleting other possibilities in order to be able to validate and justify the utterance of impossible. So I feel that it's impossible to conduct business normally right now. What is normal business? So if we take off normally, does that still hold true? I feel that it's impossible to conduct business, period. Okay. So in order to validate the impossible statement, the adverb of normally had to be attached to business. Okay, I saw on my social media just the other day, which made me happy. One of my students and clients that's a real estate agent just posted a new listing. So I know it's possible to conduct business, but conducting business normally as you would, maybe not. So in order to validate impossible, we have to add normally. So what I encourage this person to do is, I feel that it is impossible to conduct business, period. Stop, detach the normally from that and ask yourself, is that actually true? What happens is, if we start to shift our mindset to thinking, is it possible then to conduct business, period? Yes. That puts us in a different mindset. That puts us in a different frequency. So that puts us in a different resonance. So that allows us to attract ideas and thoughts that will take us in a direction that actually will allow us to move forward, instead of putting a block that says impossible. Going through people's houses just seems wrong. What specifically is wrong by going through a person's house where nobody is there? During a time of distancing and would-be reflection. Okay, so here's what a lot of my students and clients who are real estate agents do. They coordinate and they say, are you going to be there? Oh, okay, great. Can I come see it when you're not there? Okay. Or when you do social distancing, it says, great, put on a mask, 6 feet or 10 feet or 12 feet, whatever the number is. I don't care. It doesn't matter. I mean, there are ways that you can do that. Okay. So my fundamental struggle, which means a baseline struggle, is that our practices are halted. Are the practices still halted? I see posted on social media all the time, new listings. Are practices actually halted, or are people adapting and adjusting? And the clients seem too internally focused. Well, obviously not all clients are, okay, to be receptive to marketing efforts. Now, there's a perception of what marketing efforts are. Now, let's talk a little bit about marketing, because I'm sure people will be thinking, how do I market my business? How do I market? Marketing is an interesting thing. Marketing fundamentally is all about addressing the concerns and showing that your audience what's available as a resource to solve a particular problem. I guarantee that during these times, people still have problems. Okay, I guarantee during these times, there are people who still want to invest in real estate, or still want to buy real estate, or still want to sell real estate, okay, sell their properties, okay? It is a question of how well do you understand your audience, and how willing are you to understand where they are right now during these times, so that the copy, the language, the message that you're communicating for your marketing efforts addresses the concerns and the challenges and the problems they're having now. Bad marketing is when you are basically putting out and not addressing any problems and challenges that people have. Good marketing is when you are, good marketing actually serves your audience. Even if you don't sell them anything, you bring to light, you bring to awareness of a particular struggle or problem that they should be looking at to potentially solve. So when we're talking about marketing efforts, we want to think about what type of marketing, how you would define that marketing effort, so that you can say that your practices are halted, so that you can say and prove that belief and that truth that clients are too internally focused to not be wanting to be involved in real estate. When we resolve within us these belief systems, the clients that actually will appear. The opportunities that will allow you to continue to conduct business will appear. And that all comes down, and it starts with the primal emotions of anger, sadness, fear, hurt, guilt. But like today, what we're talking about is fear and frequency. You stay in a state of fear too long without taking the time to really kind of have that introspective conversation with it, to resolve that fear, you will eventually start to emit that frequency, which then will repel, okay, things that aren't in harmony with that fear, and attract what is in harmony with that fear. And this applies with every other emotion as well. Anger, sadness, derivatives of fear, which is doubt, worry, anxiety, hurt, and guilt. Those are the primal fears that lock us into that derailment state or that stuck state. Okay, so so what I encourage you to do this week is do exactly what those things, with those comments, those questions that we have, do some of those exercises, define the terms that you use to describe your fear, and then go deeper. Like follow the rabbit hole. Well, what will happen? What is it that you specifically fear about X, Y, or Z? And then whatever answer that is, ask that question again and keep asking the same question over and over again till you get to a root problem, the root reason, okay, why you are actually having that decision to be fearful. That will then adjust your frequency, and that will then change your circumstances outside of you. To change the circumstances outside of you, you have to start with what was the creator of those circumstances, or what contributed to the circumstances to begin with. Keep in mind that everything that you see outside of you that you deem as a problem is an end result of something or some decision that started in here a long time ago. Okay? When we take ownership of that, that means we become a master of our circumstances, and that's when we can change our circumstances without being a victim of the external circumstances in our world. Okay. Any questions? I think that's good enough for this week in terms of addressing how we can have a fresh start. Imagine what it'd be like to have a fresh start every single week, addressing the fears and releasing our fears and letting go of our fears and shifting our frequency and fine-tuning our frequency. So every week that goes by, it gets better and better and better. We start to attract better opportunities. We start to attract solutions. We start to have more clarity of thought. We don't get stuck and mired in what the rest of the world seems to want to get stuck and mired in, so that we can move forward in a powerful way. Imagine what that would be like. Just for a moment, think about, okay, take all your fears and throw it out the window. What would life be like then? Okay. So thank you for the feedback, Christina. Not a question, it was mind-blowing. Thank you. Yeah, it's fascinating. And the reason why I love talking about it, because I've seen it work every single time, over and over again. And it blows my mind. There are times when I wake up and I go do this work and I realize, oh, what if it doesn't work today? Or how about this year? What if this process, these approaches don't work? It doesn't. The fundamental parts of human existence is that if we move away from the rules and of what we think we're supposed to be, and we challenge that, just challenge it and start to loosen our grips on it, all these opportunities start to show up. It's like something that's blocking the sun from coming in, like a rock, and you start to jostle around, you start to see rays of light kind of come through, and realize that we spent a lot of our lives living in this perceived space of, there's a darkness. And then all of a sudden light comes in, you're like, oh, there's more. There's more out there. And if you subscribe to the school of thought that, I remember the biggest room in the world is a room for improvement. And you're always, I tell people all the time, is like, the day I don't learn something new about myself, about the world, about people in general, is probably the day I should die, because then what's the point? Every day should be this state of awe and wonderment, and imagine living life like that and getting things done and pushing business forward and everything. So very, very important. Any other questions, comments, feedback, requests, maybe even for what we maybe should talk about next week? Because I respond much better to when we're talking about something that you guys want support around. It helps me a lot instead of just coming up with stuff. Sure, I can meditate on it and ask, what do these people want that I can talk about, and then I can go with the answer, kind of like today. But throughout the week, if you have any questions or requests or something comes up, please send an email to Nikki so Nikki can get that information to me, so I can start to curate even better content. My goal is that as every week goes by, that I can actually create more relevant content that actually is catered to all of y'all. All y'all. Okay. So that was
great. Thank you so much. So like Wei said, if anybody has topics that they want discussed on next week's Monday meeting, please send them over to me and I will send them to him. That way he can kind of form the discussion on that. And unless there's anything else, we will see you guys next week. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Nikki.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.